And welcome back to Skyblazer. Did I mention that the passwords keep track of how many extra lives you have? Because I really like that about this game. X, Y, and B are associated with the X, O, and triangle shape, and the A button is associated with that red thing over there, which actually acts as a delete key. Now, speaking of religious iconography, there is actually a ton of it in this game if you haven't already picked up on it. In particular associated with Hinduism. Now, there's not necessarily a rocky history with Hinduism in Japan. They've been there since the late to mid-1800s, I believe. However, it is sort of villainized at parts in this game. And I'll get back to more on that later as soon as I explain what's going to happen next, which is the first flying section, which will happen right here in the Cliffs of Peril. This is basically another side-scrolling sequence, except you're flying in this one, and the screen's going to scroll on its own. And you tap B in order to fly up, and attacking now throws a flaming punch forward. I don't know why suddenly now you can shoot fire out of your hand when you couldn't before, but just roll with it. Anyway, back to the religious aspects. Now, I am not accusing the game developers here of any sort of ill will toward Hinduism. For those of you who don't know, Hinduism is a minority religion in Japan. There's only about 4,000 people who practice it. But that being said, there are a fair amount of influences from Hinduism on Japan. Like the 7 gods of fortune, 3 of them are associated with Hindu deities, or some basis in the Hindu deities. But in this game, Hinduism seems kind of villainized to me. Take, for example, Ashura, who's one of the main villains helping out Raglan. Ashura is actually the name of a group of power-seeking deities in Hinduism that are considered sinful and materialistic. And, by the way, you absolutely have to move to the right to finish that level. It won't end on its own. And that takes us now to the Tower of Terralisk, in which we will be doing some side-scrolling, but not in the traditional way. Mode 7 Ho! You have to climb up these towers in order to get to the boss, and I am going to stop in this room first to show you one thing. This is how we're going to be using the Comet Flash most of the time. To get stuff like that. Anyway, as I was saying, if you actually look at Ashura in this game, he actually looks similar in some regards to both the Hindu god Vishnu, as well as, what were they called? I think they're called the Garuda. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong again. He looks like a cross between Vishnu in both sort of the color of his skin and the multiple arms, as well as the Garuda, which are sort of eagle-like. They have wings on their backs, they wear crowns on their head. He looks incredibly similar to a cross between those two. And for this guy, avoid the lightning at all costs. It is a one-hit kill at this point. And by the way, you can keep going back into these rooms in order to collect more diamonds or more power-ups or whatever you might need. So it is entirely possible to grind lives in this game. And you absolutely do not want to fall at any point in this. Unless you have a really good memory of where everything is, you do not want to fall. Alright, so I'm gonna have to be very careful through this sequence, but if you have enough magic power, you can just drag and slash everything from a distance. These, however, I wouldn't worry too much about, just run up and punch them, but the eyeball things, sometimes those can kind of screw you over, so think about just dragging and slashing those. Now, that wasn't the last tower sequence. There is going to be another one following after this. Yeah, that'll happen automatically if you get pushed off the edge by these things, so you have to be careful of that. It's a cheap way to take damage, but you gotta look out for it. And now we will go back outside and have to side scroll through these sequences, either drag and slash or just flat out avoid these guys. When they move down, you can jump over them and just avoid all of this. In fact, I think you could comet flash all the way across to the other side. Kinda like what I did here. Now, there's absolutely nothing to the left, don't bother. And if I didn't mention it before, L and R swap magic spells. And you're gonna have to really trust yourself for sequences like this. When you hit this platform, it's gonna trigger a bunch of spawning blocks. If you've ever played Mega Man 1, Iceman stage, where you have to progress through those blocks that appear over the gaps and leading up to higher walls, it's kind of like that. And with those guys that I just showed who fire the lightning, if you keep them on the edge of the screen, most likely they won't shoot their lightning at you. You can just take them out with the Dragon Slash. Timing is crucial for this point. You absolutely need to land on that block as it spawns, and you have to take short jumps because these blocks disappear incredibly fast. Now when you get to this final block here, just jump straight to this platform. You don't need to hit that final disappearing block. And there's nothing that appears like up and to the right for this section, so don't even bother checking there. And we're just going to wait for the platform to come back and head into the top of the tower, where we will have another one of these crushing wall sequences. And this is fairly standard. If you've ever played Super Mario World, you should be familiar with this. Only thing I can really say here is take your time. And don't be suckered in by power-ups. And now as we make our way further to the top of the tower, you'll see that there's plenty of magic items to make sure that you're at full strength when you head into the boss. And to some degree, you are going to need your magic for this boss. Most of the time you won't need it, but there is one particular sequence where you will. And this boss is the Beholder. He rolls along the wall, always stops in the lower right, and fires a fireball at you. Now as you hit him, he gets progressively larger. And you'll need to keep jumping over him and either punching or jump kicking him in the eye. Now for this sequence, what I use is the Comet Flash so that I can make sure I clear his body. You don't have to use that. It is technically possible to still jump over him, but it's not something I would advise. Now, I actually died the first time, which is why my life and magic indicator is different. Now, from this point on, you can duck in the corner in order to avoid him. And you will absolutely need to do that at this next size, which should be his final hit, when he pretty much takes up all the space in the room. And once we are done with this, we will be able to attain our next power-up, something which might be useful or not depending on how you play this game. It's the heal ability. Sacrifice magic to gain some hit points back. And now we will be going to our next shrine, which will lead us actually to a bonus sequence. In this one, the gateway to the Eastern Plane, we're going to talk to the old man and then fly to the Eastern Plane. But not in the same way that we flew back at the Cliffs of Peril. What we're going to have here is, instead of a side-scrolling sequence, we're going to have a third-person view from behind Sky as he flies across the gap between this island and the Eastern Plane. Now, the reason I said this is a bonus sequence is there are tons and tons of 10-point diamonds here. And yes, they are suddenly counting for 10 points again. Not quite sure how that works. Now, the only thing I can say about this sequence in particular is it is surprisingly difficult to control. Unless you're, like, tapping the direction you want Sky to fly, he will just cruise all the way across the edges of the map, so you have to constantly readjust your position. And once you're past this sequence, the diamonds will start appearing in circles. But the thing about that is, there's going to be spiked circles, which you'll have to avoid. So rather than fly through the middle of them, I would just fly off to the side, stream across, grab whatever you can, and then move again. And getting back to the Hinduism thing, I mentioned how the Japanese name for this game was Karurao, right? Well, Karura is the name of a fire-breathing creature that's based on the Hindu mythical divinity of Garuda that appears in Japanese Hindu-Buddhist mythology. Now, I'm just looking all this up as I go. I do not know much about religion in general, much less the particulars of Hinduism, Buddhism, and all the religions in Japan, but I find it interesting to find all these little connections. Now, this guy is saying that we have to attain 4 minor powers before we can master the final bigger power, but there's not actually 4 minor powers. There's something like 7 different magical powers in this game that we can get. However, he does help us out by increasing our life gauge by 1 point. However, if you do lose a life, you will always appear with 4 hit points and 4 magic points. There's not much you can do about that. Now, I mentioned I would go into more detail about how this overworld map works. Whenever you go to a destination that you haven't been before except for the shrines, you will automatically enter that location. And if you go to the left in particular, you'll have a choice to go either up or down. Pretty simple overworld lay, and if you want to go into a place again, you can do that by hitting B. But next time on Skyblazer, we'll be entering that castle in the upper right known as Petrolith Castle.